lunch. Woo! Welcome back to for the second day of the National Conference on Undergraduate Research. I hope you all had a great day yesterday and this morning, and I hope you enjoyed the activities that gave you the opportunity to engage, explore, and experience research and scholarship across so many disciplines: public health, nursing, biology, the arts, humanities, behavioral and social science. There are so many to choose from. It's very exciting. We had a wonderful kickoff yesterday when we heard from our plenary speaker, Alistair Dove, who shared his remarkable journey with us, where he started in undergraduate research, looking at parasites in fish, all the way to becoming a leading expert in whale sharks. That was pretty amazing, right? Yeah. And today we're going to hear some inspirational words from Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, so I'm looking forward to that. But before we get started with today's session, I feel like it's important for us to acknowledge the volunteers just one more time, right? So there are literally hundreds of volunteers for this event from KSU, including faculty and staff and administrators and community members. And you've all heard that phrase, "It takes a village." Well, I'd like to introduce you to our village. So if you are a volunteer, I think I see some yellow shirts out there. If you're a volunteer, will you please stand up and be recognized one more time? There are not many here. They're all outside working, I think. So where else can you engage with other researchers and ask thought-provoking questions during presentations? Where else can you explore topics that match your own interests with researchers who are presenting their study methodology and results? And where else can you experience performances and visual arts displays from other undergraduates which evoke imagination, emotion, and scholarly inquiry? Only at the 2019 National Conference on Undergraduate Research, and this year only at Kennesaw State University. So we're pretty excited for you all to be here, and I want to talk a little bit, just a few minutes, about research and what it means for you and for your careers, which we heard yesterday from Alistair Dove about how undergraduate research impacted him. So let's talk about how that impacts you, and particularly your involvement in this event. So research, really in all its forms, is a high-impact educational practice, the most vital type that really serves as the connection between a student's unique interests and future career plans. Research can help you define what you want to do with your life and give you those transferable skills for the workforce. So today, as the program continues, and I've seen this already, I really encourage you to not only ask your fellow researchers about the results that they're presenting, but ask them about what motivates them to do the research. And I've been fortunate enough to sit in a couple of sessions already, and I am hearing those types of questionings. But the motivation is equally as important as the research itself. So give each other feedback. Learn from each other. You are here because you share a common goal to investigate, illuminate, and innovate ways to address pressing issues of our society. And research creates these opportunities for you to not only develop your own inquiry and analytic skills, but then also to provide an outlet for you to, I'm going to do the 3 E's again, engage, explore, and experience the research process. So I wish you all a wonderful day ahead as you engage, explore, and experience undergraduate research and scholarship at the National Conference this year. And I also look forward to seeing you all tonight at the Braves game wearing your NCUR t-shirts. Let's show Atlanta proud with your t-shirts and all that you're doing here this year. Thank you so much for coming to our state. Have a great day.
Serving as the president of the Council on Undergraduate Research and from the University of Delaware, please welcome to the stage Ian Crawford.
Hello, I'm Ian Crawford. I teach English at the University of Delaware, where I'm also the faculty director of the undergraduate research program. And this year I have the honor to serve as president of the Council on Undergraduate Research. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the National Conference on Undergraduate Research, to offer my congratulations to our presenters, and my wishes that you're all having a great conference experience. You might possibly have noticed that I'm not from these parts. I am indeed an English professor. And yet I almost am. For 10 years, I taught at Berry College, which is just 45 minutes up the road from here. And a couple of weeks ago, I celebrated becoming an American citizen in Atlanta. Thank you. It was on April Fool's Day, 1995. Probably the last time one could make a joke about immigration. And I'll be spending this weekend in the city with my 2 daughters, their families, and the 6 grandchildren. So I've known this part of Georgia for a long time. And one of the amazing things for me about coming to this NCUR is our host, Kennesaw State. When I moved away from Georgia in 1995, it was a very different institution. It mostly served commuter students, and it looked an awful lot like the big mall 1 exit down I-75, a cluster of buildings surrounded by parking lots. A quarter of a century on, and the transformation into a vibrant, dynamic, 21st century university is breathtaking. Those of us who knew Atlanta 30 years ago often trace its emergence as a world city to the experience of hosting the Olympics in 1996. For Kennesaw State, I hope, hosting this NCUR, the largest we've ever had, will be both a symbol of and a catalyst for its development into one of the South's leading universities. So let me add my thanks then to KSU and all the members of the team who've done such a wonderful job of putting on the conference this year. Before I turn the podium over to this afternoon's speaker, can I draw your attention to just a few upcoming CUR events and remind you of some of the opportunities that you have during and after this conference. This week is Undergraduate Research Week nationally, so what better time to hold NCUR? You can follow activities and events across the nation on Twitter at #URW2019. For faculty and administrators who run undergraduate research programs, there's a wonderful opportunity to attend CUR's URP conference at Ohio State in late June. If you've never been to this meeting, it's grown rapidly into one of the single most exciting gathering place for all of us who direct undergraduate research programs. A terrific opportunity to hear about the latest ideas in undergraduate research, to network with colleagues, and to meet old and new friends. I recommend this one highly. For students and their faculty mentors, some of you may be attending Posters on the Hill, CUR's most prestigious advocacy event later this month in Washington. This is an amazing opportunity to travel to DC, to meet with your congressional delegation, and present your work on Capitol Hill. The competition for the 2020 event will open in the fall. Do check out the CUR website and consider applying. Turning to our current event, just a quick reminder for the students that you have an opportunity to publish your research in the NCUR proceedings. There's nothing like seeing your work in print. While we've been here at the conference, I sent a book in a week ago, and while we've been here at the conference, I've been going back and forth with my publisher in Scotland, and it's just thrilling to think about your ideas, the things you wrote and developed, being seen by other people in print. It's great for your professional resume as well. I encourage you to think about CUR proceedings. For faculty and administrators, have you ever thought about hosting NCUR? You might perhaps be a bit daunted, but it's an amazing experience for a campus. If you're interested in it, please join the NOC Committee Chair, Sarah Johnson, and her colleagues for an overview of the selection process immediately following our plenary this afternoon. That'll be at 2:45 in the Prillaman Health Sciences Building. And following that session, we hope to see many of you in the Jolly Lodge, where we'll celebrate Kennesaw State's accomplishment as our NCUR 2019 host, and look forward to the transition to Montana State's hosting of NCUR in 2020. We'll also be honoring this year's Kerr Goldwater Faculty Mentor Awardee. That event will take place from 4 to 5. And finally, a couple of quick reminders. One of NCUR's special features, the Faculty Administrator Network session tomorrow morning, bright and early at 7:30 in the Burris Building. That's a great thing. And for the students, if you haven't gone to the art exhibit, please do. It's fantastic. And in the app, this wonderful app we've all been using, there's an art competition where you can see the works and vote on them for a prize. Please do that. And otherwise, I hope you continue to enjoy this conference, have a wonderful experience here. Thank you very much.
Current senior at Kennesaw State University. Graduating this May, majoring in biology and minoring in Spanish, Brittany Notice.
Today I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker. Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice is the 6th president of Morehouse School of Medicine and the first woman to lead the freestanding medical institution. Dr. Montgomery Rice is a renowned interfertility specialist and researcher and an advocate for healthcare equity. Prior to joining Morehouse School of Medicine, Dr. Montgomery Rice held faculty positions and leadership roles at various health centers. Most noticeably, she was the founding director of the Center for Women's Health Research at Meharry Medical College, one of the nation's first research centers devoted to studying diseases that disproportionately impact women of color. Dedicated to the creation and advancement of health equity, Dr. Montgomery Rice lends her vast experience and talents to programs that enhance pipeline opportunities for academically diverse students, diversifies the physician and scientific workforce, and fosters equity in healthcare access and health outcomes. To this end, she holds membership in many organizations and boards, including National Academy of Medicine, National Center for Advising Translational Sciences, Board of Directors for the Numerous Foundation, and Board of Directors for United Health Group. Dr. Montgomery Rice has received numerous accolades and honors, including the 2017 Horatio Alger Award, and for 2 consecutive years was named as one of the 100 most influential Georgians by Georgia Trend magazine. Please help me welcome Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice.
We just had a flat tire. But we got here. And so thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all of you all who are so attentive to being here today. I am going to go through some slides because that's how I like to talk as a scientist. I still can't get away from that. And then I think a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words. And so I want to talk about the promise of science. And I hope that all of you all are excited about the opportunities that science allows. I'm going to tell you a journey about a little girl from Macon, Georgia, who was introduced to science by no real connection to anyone who was doing science, but just to understanding how life can really unfold with science. So this is me in Rennes, Georgia, with my grandmother and my sisters hanging out back in the early 60s. Okay. And I was asked to talk to you about some pearls of wisdom and how someone like me gets interested in science. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So here's one of those pearls of wisdom. How many of you are familiar with this book? The Alchemist. So I read this book every year around the holidays. There's one great truth on this planet. Whoever you are, whatever it is that you want to do, when you really want something, it's because that desire really originates in the soul of the universe. It's your mission on earth. And the other part of that I like to say, the entire universe conspires with you to make it happen. Now, in order for a little country girl born in Macon, living out in the summers in Wrens, to get to where I am, the entire universe had to be conspiring with me to make this happen. I really do believe that. And I've had a journey from health disparities to health equity, and I think about that as looking at life differently than the glass half empty to the glass half full. And so here's my journey: Macon, Georgia Tech, Harvard Medical School, Emory University, and I don't even know what that place is, someplace I hung out, Kansas University School of Medicine, then to Mahara Medical College, opening the Center for Women's Health Research, and now to Morehouse School of Medicine. So one thing you got to see about this journey, you don't get to where you're trying to go by staying in the same place, right? And then you don't get to know all of the opportunities in the universe unless you hang out in some different places. So one of the first things that I did that I really think solidified for me, more than just loving science and having an interest, but actually moving beyond passion to purpose, was when I was able to found the Center for Women's Health Research at Montgomery. And this was in 2006, and at our grand opening, we talked about the infinite power of healing, because that's what this center was about. We were recognizing clearly at that time that there were health disparities, that there were differences in access, yes, but even when we controlled for access for women, that there were significant challenges in understanding and seeing how we could close the gaps. That there were socioeconomic factors and geographic factors, meaning that your zip code could determine your outcome. So that became our rationale for the Center for Women's Health Research. And as a reproductive endocrinologist and fertility specialist, I had always done a lot of research on looking at the hormonal influences on ovarian cancer, or your chances of achieving pregnancy, or looking at the reasons why fibroids were disproportionately higher in women of color. So we decided to look at this center from a disease perspective, hormonally driven focus, and we were going to look at cellular and genetic differences. And this is before we had totally mapped out the genome, but we knew that that was going to be important. And then the last part that was really key was that we wanted to make sure that we would be able to translate the findings to outcomes that would be meaningful for a community. That's what we mean by translational research. That's what's important to people. So first of all, if you know anything about what happens when you start to collect a lot of data, you start to find out things that you hadn't thought about, and you looked at that women reported themselves different outcomes, and we saw differences there based on race and ethnicity. We also looked at, when we started to look at diseases, we started to see that those same women had higher rates of obesity or hypertension or diabetes, and so there must have been some type of correlation. And then if you looked at the real key outcome, we saw that there was a difference in life expectancy. So we know that these diseases that were health disparities, that these gaps were resulting in women having a lower chance of life. And so our focus initially was looking at reproductive health, fibroids, osteoporosis. Osteoporosis was one of those diseases that was reversed. White women have a higher chance of developing osteoporosis or thinning of the bones than black women. So we began to learn something about estrogen metabolism. Learning about that estrogen metabolism also impacted us understanding more about fibroid disease and why it was disproportionately higher in women of color. And then, of course, cancer, the dreaded disease, the dreaded word. Excuse me, can I have a bottle of water, please? The dreaded disease or the dreaded word that everyone hates to hear. And we cannot forget behavior, excuse me, influences. Oh, I got one right here. And the, okay, I think I still have a voice. The pollen in Atlanta. How many of you are from Georgia? How many of you from not from Georgia? And you're saying to yourself, what is this stuff falling out of the trees? And we are too. But it gets you. The behavior influences is really important because people are really beginning to now understand how things that we do in our life from the beginning influence our outcomes. And we also were focusing and continue to focus on HIV and AIDS. And the reason for that, you all, is the disproportionate number of cases that we were seeing in African American women. So women's health and race became one of the things that we centered on in overcoming health disparities. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So if you look at breast cancer, we know that regardless of race and ethnicity, there's comparable rates in which women will receive their mammograms. And thank goodness it's much better now. Comparable rates in some areas for pap smears and very low rates for people who get colonoscopy. But if we focus on this breast cancer, one of the things that we saw, that even though women had equal access to mammograms, we saw a higher mortality rate of death from breast cancer for Black women. And we wanted to know why. So we entered into a study in conjunction with the Susan Komen Foundation, where we started to look at mammography and look at the different images that women, screening tests that women would have. And we found, along with others, that Black women had much more dense breasts. All women of color had more dense breasts than Caucasian women, which led us to understand that there may be an opportunity for improvement here if more women of color were receiving digital mammography for their screening, which has now become the standard of care overall. But it was there when we were able to see that there were missed opportunities when you were doing analog mammography on women of color. We also then did lots of other different things that gave us more of an indication that even when you control for that, we still saw a higher mortality. And we began to see triple negative breast cancer more so in women of color. So we started to collect blood and other samples to be used for future genetic studies and to try to help us to understand more about estrogen metabolism. And so what we now know is, not just based on our work, but others, that African American women have increased breast density. They have earlier age of diagnosis. They have a higher mortality, and they have a higher incidence of triple negative. Now, it takes longitudinal studies to get to that information, but now what you can do, you have a baseline now from when you're going to do to that next level. You can inform where you're going to allocate resources to be more targeted, to really answer the questions of why. Has the data changed? Because now from when we looked at this to 2017, and what we see is that we still see this disproportionate outcomes. In the state of Georgia, particularly Atlanta has the widest gap of mortality based on race and ethnicity for breast cancer deaths than any other city. So we are continuing to partner with this in this area. We also know that there are many other opportunities in Georgia to improve our screening, particularly when we get to rural communities. And if you look at the data I'm showing you, some of it shows the cancer statistics, and much of this is because of access. And so we can do a better job. The other important thing that we figured out, though, regardless for any of those cancers that we were looking at, breast cancer, cervical cancer, colon cancer, that early detection is the key to survival. Let me give you another example. This is back when we were really starting to look at why were more women of color being infected with HIV, and why were we seeing this disparity, meaning that if you look at this right here, 67% of the population are white, but only 30% of the cases were in Caucasians, whereas when you looked at his, 13% of the population was black, but 49% of the cases were in people of color. That's what we mean by disparity. Now, when heart therapy, which is the drugs that were the combination of drugs that came about, the antiviral drugs, one of the things that you see is around the 1986, 87, when those drugs came about, you see, 96, 97, you see a reduction in mortality for everybody. So that tells you that the drugs worked, right? So when you implemented heart therapy, it did reduce mortality. But we still saw a disproportionate number of African American women with the disease as compared. So one of the things we started to recognize is that we didn't put our money in the right places necessarily to ensure dissemination. In other words, did we allocate enough resources to those communities that were disproportionately impacted, not just in having access to the therapy, but also in education? And we believe that that's part of the reason why we continue to see this type of trend here. So even with the advent of a therapy, we saw a higher black-white mortality, meaning more black women were dying versus white women, even though there was a therapy available. And this is when you start to understand that your research has to go beyond just a discovery. The discovery is just a discovery unless it gets disseminated to the communities that really need it to have its impact. And so we always call this as unintended consequences. The absence of attention to federal law and policy that would allow for equal diffusion, not unequal diffusion, of life-saving treatments. Because when you allow for that unequal diffusion, what you get is unequal health outcomes that lead to an increase in disparities between blacks and whites. We can see the same thing for rural versus urban. We can see the same thing sometimes based on gender because of the inherent differences that we have. We are continuing to address this through combination with Meharry, and one of the things that we did was start to work on a vaginal microbicide that would give women more power to control their destiny, to prevent themselves from developing the disease. This is some of the basic science work we did under Dr. James Hildreth, who's now the president of Meharry, and he's continuing to work with this sugar, a simple sugar, that can prevent HIV. And when we looked at this, and I will skip some of this, when we looked at this, we started to understand that we needed to go to a place that had a larger cohort of people who were being infected, such that we could see more of the impact. And so we've been doing work now in Zambia with that cohort of persons because of the percentage of those women who are disproportionately infected. And this is one of our first papers that we published. And this was first looking at the acceptability of a vaginal microbicide in a global community. So even though we had a therapy that we thought would work, we first had to go to that community to see if it would be acceptable to them. Many of you have heard about cultural competency, correct? Being culturally sensitive. Well, one of the things that you learn as a researcher, particularly when you have your big, great discovery, is that you may be the only person who believes, you in your lab, that it's a big, great discovery, unless you actually begin to ask the people who are going to be impacted by the discovery. And so we always try to make sure, particularly as we're young in our career of discovery, that we think about who's going to be that end user. And we understand what could be the barriers up front to why they may not find it as exciting as we do, based on their cultural environment, their beliefs, what are the structural barriers that may prevent its dissemination. And so we are continuing this work because we believe it's important. Now, overall, we know that there's a significant economic impact to health disparities, you all. And these health disparities are not just based on race and ethnicity. We're looking at it and seeing it more based on the geography of the country, your zip code. And we know just in Georgia that it provides for a higher economic burden. And it places us where we are now continuing to play catch up in how we allocate resources. At Morehouse School of Medicine, we have been working for a long time to try to develop innovative programs to bring down the cost of these disparities, addressing it at the primary care level, first looking at access, and then dissemination. So we know it matters, and we know that if you have a health disparity, particularly if you look at a black person between the age of 18 and 34, 35 to 49, they are 9 times to 5 times as likely to die from a homicide, which would be a disparity, okay? They're higher chance they're gonna have high blood pressure or die from heart disease. All of these challenges lead us to think about why diversity in medicine is important. Morehouse School of Medicine is one of the 4 historically black medical schools. Now, that does not mean that we only take black students. We have a diverse population. We're trying to educate and train the healthcare professionals that the nation needs. So we try to look at the changes in the demographics to understand who we need to train. We really focus a lot on people who come from underserved urban communities and rural communities, because we know the data says that those are the persons who are more likely to go back and practice in those communities. And that helps us with one of our big challenges, and that's access. But we have some challenges with that. Part of it is that underrepresented minority percentage of students going to medical school has not changed significantly over the last 15 years. And while we've seen some increases in the application pool for non-minority students, for minority students, it is flat. And it's mostly flat for when we look at acceptance rate to medical school, where they're going to get accepted even if they apply, and we know that it also disproportionately impacts black males. We know that this matters, though, you all, because how we learn and how we focus is influenced by something that we call our cognitive diversity. And that is, what are your life experiences? Where do you come from? Those are the things that build your value system, so we know that this matters when we're looking at infant mortality or maternal mortality, or looking at these diseases that disproportionately impact communities that are underserved. I'm just going to skip because I want to make sure that we get to why we do some of the things that we do at Morehouse School of Medicine. We were founded to address this physician shortage, and this physician shortage has continued. We have 119 out of 159 counties in the state of Georgia that are underserved. So when we recruit for students at Morehouse School of Medicine, we are really sensitive to the fact of where we get our applications, who interviews, and who matriculates. And you can see those green counties got less compared to the yellow and blue. The yellow and blue, though, are opportunities, because those are counties where students are who've gone to undergraduate, who've taken the MCAT, but for some reason they weren't successful. So we try to partner those students with some of our alums to increase their opportunities for success. And although we primarily, 70% of our population comes from Georgia, that's our intention. It is not a requirement, but we believe we are partners with this state in improving access. We also recruit students from other states. This year alone, for our 100 spots in the medical school, we got 7,200 applications. We also create pipelines, starting with K through 5, middle school, high school, college, and if you go onto our website, you will see these lists of pipeline programs that we have, because we know that we have to grow our own, and that is grow students who would be interested in going into primary care, practicing in underserved communities. And even if someone wanted to be an oculoplastic surgeon, when they graduate from Morehouse School of Medicine, we always say they are a primary care doctor until proven otherwise, because of how we educate and train them. And they think about that person sitting in front of them when they undergo provided care. This is so important, you all, because at the end of the day, this is what we are trying to achieve: health equity. And when we think about health equity, I think of this cartoon, and hopefully you've seen this, because these three friends are good friends, and they just wanted to go to the baseball game. They were late. They got there late. They had to stand behind the fence. And the tall friend said, "You know what? I'm going to go get us some boxes so we can look over the fence to see the game." And at first he gave everybody the same box. His little short friend still could not see over the fence. And then he had a bright idea. He said, "I'm going to give my short friend 2 boxes, my medium height friend 1 box, and I won't take a box at all today because I'm already tall enough to see over the fence." And so it was really about giving people what they need, when they need it, and the amount they need to reach their optimal level of health. That's what health equity is for us. Sometimes in that box is access to a primary care doctor. Sometimes it's access to a cancer specialist. Sometimes it's transportation. It's some other factor that may be serving as a structural barrier to that person seeing over the fence, because the objective was to do what? See the game. And if we keep that in focus, it sometimes helps us with some of our biases that we have that people bring with them by no fault, the challenges that people bring with them by no fault of their own. The real opportunity, though, you all, to achieve justice is to remove the fence. Just remember that. I am a believer that science is one of the things that can help move the fence. And so I'm excited that you all have taken out your time to come and see the miracles and learn more about the miracles of what science can do, because it can create opportunity, it can improve the quality of life, and it can extend life. It is the promise of hope that should not be affected by someone's gender, race, ethnicity, orientation, geographical location, whatever. Everyone should be able to achieve their optimal level of health. So when you think about this little country girl in Macon, visiting her grandmother's in the summer. You think about the things and the people who had to be invested alongside her in order for her to achieve and go across the map to achieve these goals. The entire universe had to be conspiring with me to make that happen. And I think about it from a public health perspective. On that x-axis, you see socioeconomic status. On that y, you see health. And you think about all the steps that I have made. Now, if when I was in the hospital in the 3rd grade with osteomyelitis for 3 months, they gave me a lot of great antibiotics. And that didn't change my socioeconomic status, but it improved my health. But when I got out of that hospital, and I was riding a bus called the Lucky Duck bus, and integration had just happened, my education became something that was very critical to me being able to move along the slope of that line. And that's what we would want for everyone. Not only for them to improve their socioeconomic status, and it results in an improvement of their health, but for them to be able to be empowered to improve it on their own, or with the resources that are available or that should be available for them. And education for me, you all, was that great equalizer. Every time I moved along that slope, I also increased my socioeconomic status, I could make more informed decisions, and my health is improving. To my knowledge, I don't have any known medical problems. Education, though, is the great equalizer. It has allowed me to make my passion my purpose. My love for math and science, my math teachers and science teachers who helped me along the way, my women's health research, and then my passion for educating and training the next generation, using health disparities as a reference to that, and now are trying to achieve health equity, to have us think about this opportunity not as a quota, not as a gift to someone, but as a right to someone. For everyone that I come in contact with, to ask a simple question. Based on who's sitting in front of me, what's possible? If you do that with every encounter, you will be amazed at what you will have to release about yourself and focus on the other person. Do they really have the resources to get these prescriptions filled that I'm offering? Do they have transportation? Is there something else going on in the household? Have I really explored the best opportunity for them? Do I know all the research that's aligned with their circumstances? Because I'm trying to give them their optimal opportunity to achieve their optimal level of health. When you want something and it's right, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow. So let's give another round of applause. I am so inspired. I don't know about the rest of you. For those of you who may not remember, I'm Alice Wheelwright, and I lead marketing and communications here at Kennesaw State. And would you have a few minutes to take a few questions? Okay. So if you remember the drill from yesterday, we've got podiums right on either side here. So if the students want to line up, we'll take some questions. But in the meantime, I have to say, well, one, just that was so inspiring, and your work is so important. But what do you see coming on like the next horizon here of research that you're super excited about?
So I am super excited about data science. Okay, how many of you are interested in data science? Okay, data science, no matter what your discipline is, you need to be taking some data science courses. And what do I mean by that? Courses that help you understand, first of all, what is data, everything we do, how to utilize it in your profession, and how to analyze it. And all of our institutions should be offering core courses no matter what your major is. The second thing I'm excited about is our ability to democratize the opportunities for genomics. Genomics is going to be used in every phase of how we deliver care, and we need to make sure that our genome is reflective of the diversity of our populations. Right now, the Human Genome Project had about 98% Caucasian, about 2% non-Caucasian, so we need to explore that differently. We know now that there are data that's showing us that persons of color, particularly from African descent, have more DNA, okay? And so what does that mean? We don't quite know. And so we need to understand that, but then the opportunities that are being afforded to us for healthcare delivery as it relates to using genomics, we got to make sure that everyone has access to that opportunity.
Awesome. Okay, we'll take a question right here.
Hi, my name is Callie Fresberg from Western Carolina University, and I was wondering, what's your biggest piece of advice for a woman going into the medical field?
The best advice for a woman going into the medical field? Ooh, that's interesting. So I tend to think about these things about not necessarily based on who you are, but what's your opportunity. So it is to ensure that you have a village connected to you who see what your potential is, regardless of your gender, your race, your ethnicity, and that you align yourself with persons who see that potential in you. And then you go out and seek opportunities that would be favorable to your success, and ensure that you have this village of people who are willing to give you constructive criticism and advice on how to continue to move forward. I went to Georgia Tech at a time when there were not a lot of women at Georgia Tech, and there were not a lot of black students at Georgia Tech. And I had to decide early on that I was going to sort of not listen to the background noise. And it was a conscious decision to make, because there were always going to be people saying, well, maybe you should not do this and maybe you shouldn't do that. And when I decided I was a chemical engineering major, I was co-oping every other quarter. And I made a decision to go to medical school on a fluke. I like math and science, but I did not like the fact that there were no people involved with talking every day with chemical engineering. I didn't like that. And I had gotten a job offer from Procter & Gamble, and I decided, no, I didn't want to do this. I had never taken a biology course. I went back to Georgia Tech and I said, I think I want to go to medical school. And my advisor said he did not agree with me. And I had to disagree with him. And they let me take my biology courses at the same time. I took the MCAT, and I've never looked back. Now, what gave me the confidence to do that is that I had a village of people who were telling me that I could, and Georgia Tech had prepared me to be a lifelong learner. So, get you a village.
There we go.
Yeah.
And question over here.
My name is Morgan Levy, and I'm a student at Lafayette College, and my question is, I'm very interested in pursuing a career in the fertility field specifically, and also in health equity, but one of the big problems with fertility care is just that it's very expensive and inaccessible for patients, so I'm wondering how you synthesize those two elements of your career.
So that's a good question. So I am, you're right, reproductive endocrinology and fertility, particularly if you just look at IVF, is very expensive. So part of the questions that I would say to women as they would come to see me, do you want to be a mother, or do you want to be pregnant? Those are two different things. There are lots of ways to be a mother, But if you want the full experience of being pregnant in the continuum, then we go down a different path. So that's one of the first things, again, asking that question based on who's sitting in front of me, what is it that you really desire? Because there are some different cost structures to that. Now, there are several states, now about 23 of them, that it is a requirement that if you have health insurance, your infertility should be covered. I'm a strong proponent of that. I think it should be a covered benefit, because when you really do the analysis, this is where data comes in, it would only increase an individual's premium by less than 50%, by less than 50 cents per month, if we offer this benefit to everybody. So I think one of the things is advocacy to help people to understand, based on the number of people that would actually be utilizing the resource, that it would not have a great financial impact on everybody. And several of the states now recognize that. And so what we try to do, though, for where states where it's not available, is to look for programs and opportunities to partner with people, to make sure, and partner with entities to increase their opportunities for success.
Terrific. This over here.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I study chemistry at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And I was wondering, this might be a little bit outside of your focus, but have you considered looking into the accessibility of women's health for particularly incarcerated women in the state of Georgia?
Yes, so yes, when I was at Meharry, we actually did provide care to women who were incarcerated. And just like any other underserved community or group, we find that there's a wider gap in the disparities, okay, of the diseases. And part of it is not so much the access, it is the quality of the experience they have and the opportunity that they have. And so what we need to do is, first of all, think about a prevention strategy for people before they come to prison. Because most women who are in prison for drug offenses and not necessarily felony, quote unquote, crimes. And then we got to think about the social environment that gets them there. So if someone gave me an opportunity to address this, I would address this from a social determinant empowerment perspective of giving women opportunities for education so they can make different informed decisions. If you give anyone an opportunity for education, they make different decisions about their health care. Thank you.
Very good. Awesome. And here.
Hi, I'm Dario from Tulsa Community College in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had a question. Do you feel like women of color are less likely to come forward to get help because they feel like there is no hope that resources are there to help them? Or do you think that they just don't go forward for another reason?
I think it's a combination. So clearly, if you follow the maternal mortality story, there's significant difference in maternal mortality for women of color compared to Caucasian women. Part of this is, very frankly, because of cultural incompetence from some of our providers. That doesn't mean that people don't care. That's not what I'm saying. It is implicit and unconscious bias that we all have on what are the expectations of this person to receive or achieve optimal health when they are presented to you. And as healthcare professionals, we must have a continuum of learning of how to be more open to the differences that confront us with our patients that we're providing care. So when you look at maternal mortality, the stories are consistent that particularly women of color feel that they are not listened to in the same way about their pain levels. They come in, they say, I feel different, I don't know what's going on. Well, now I train at Grady in OBGYN. So I'm gonna be a different care provider of how I look at black women when 90% of the patients that we cared for were there. So when some woman comes in to me and she is 38 weeks pregnant and she is her first pregnancy, and she says she just doesn't feel good, the first thing that comes to my mind is preeclampsia. Why is that? Because I was trained to understand the differences in preeclampsia rates between women of color and Caucasian women because I was trained at Grady. And so even though her blood pressure may be borderline, I'm going to do the next step to make sure she's not developing preeclampsia, because I know that is preeclampsia, hypertension, and hemorrhage are the reasons why we see this challenges with maternal mortality. So making our providers more culturally competent and understanding about the diseases, differences, and who's sitting in front of us is really important. Okay.
Terrific. We'll take a question over here.
Hi, my name is Sam Gilbert from Eastern Illinois. First of all, thank you so much for talking about your research. I have two questions. What inspired you to go into this field?
What inspired me to go into medicine?
Yeah, like specifically women's health.
Because I thought I was too cute to be an engineer, to tell you the truth.
Good answer.
There's a long story behind this, but I really did not think that I wanted to be an engineer the rest of my life. And I really was looking for something that would allow me to be in contact with people. And I actually got an encyclopedia and looked up words, science, science, people, and math. And one of the things that connects is medicine. And that's how I pretty much decided I would go to medical school. I did not have anybody who was a role model. But I had a lot of confidence having been beat up at Georgia Tech a lot, because Georgia Tech, no matter what anybody says, from after even going to Harvard Medical School, Georgia Tech is still the hardest thing that I ever did in my life, okay? So the rest of it has been a piece of cake compared to that. And so that was really, for me, trying to find what was gonna get me up every morning. And I have not regretted it one bit.
Gotcha. My second question kind of has to do with policy. I do a lot of research in reproductive health and abortion access. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how state governments could increase access for women of color.
For reproductive access?
Yeah, and for infertility and everything, all of the above.
You know, I strongly believe in women's rights and their opportunities that they should be in control of their bodies. Okay, so regardless of what my personal beliefs are about abortion or anything, I believe that women should be in control of their bodies. The second thing is that I think we need to understand that reproductive health is a continuum. It is not just about having a baby. It is not just about going through menopause. There's a whole lot happens from that first day of menses to menopause that influence your well-being. And so it's about looking at our reproductive health equally to our heart and our mind. And I think when we can take the sexism out of reproductive health, then we will begin to look at women holistically and let them make their own decisions about their bodies.
Very good. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So.
Koblitz. I'm a student here at KSU studying nursing, and my question actually builds on that previous question, and it's, given the recent legislation or events surrounding women's access to certain health care, how can the disparity studies be used to protect women's health rights?
I mean, I think what we have to do again, you know, when you look at our legislators as a body, you hear a lot of noise. When you start to talk to people individually, the noise dies down. So we spend a lot of our time educating people and trying to find a connection to some issue that touches them. And I have decided that it's probably more important to make issues real to people through a connection versus trying to be there in the background noise because you won't be heard. Again, I feel very strongly about this opportunity for women to have rights to their body and the consequences of their decisions, and their decisions should not be imposed upon them. And so what we do is spend a lot of our time also informing women and empowering them to be their own best advocate.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, I apologize, but our time is up. So let's give another round of applause for our fabulous speaker. You just did a marvelous job. And I know that you all will have a great rest of your day. And so hope you enjoy the Braves tonight. And be sure again to wear your NCUR t-shirt if you're going to the Braves game or if you're out and about in the Battery. And we'll see you tomorrow for the plenary as well. Have a great day.